Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. I am making my way towards my destination this Sunday, Orlando, Florida, where we're #1, going from like #4, #5 in every major demographic in the last 6 months on 810, the Big Talker, since they've had my show on there just for a year or so. First was on the weekend, then they picked it up for less than a year, weekdays live. We're on there right now, and now #1 in every major demographic, smashing Rush Limbaugh. We've seen that happen in other cities, even with smaller stations than a big blowtorch like 810, where Goliath cannot stand against the truth. Again, the fact is, freedom is popular. The truth is popular. Jeffrey R. Smith, a real expert and investigative journalist and filmmaker, will be joining us in the last hour and a half today to talk about GMO and toxic fluoride, the history of Monsanto, aspartame, all of it. There's been a lot of big new developments. They're coming out with hundreds of new crops, not just the 30 or so that were force-fed, and that governments are moving to pass laws where you're not allowed to even label it. Not that you have to label, or not that you don't have to label, but that you're not allowed to tell someone. So we're going to be talking to him about that eugenics operation coming up in the second half of the transmission today. Okay, Jeff, you got the floor. This is a longer segment than the next, and we're going to go to calls, but continue with some of the studies, some of the facts, the suicides, what this has done to agriculture, the results it's caused. And then I want you to talk about the population reduction angle, because I remember talking to you 10 years ago, and you're like, well, Mr. Jones, there is, there is some evidence that's linked to infertility, but I'm not going to go there. But now it's becoming so widespread, even in the mainline literature. People are saying, why does it always have traits that reduce fertility? This can't just be an accident every time. Or maybe if these are live pesticides, that's what it is. But even products that aren't pesticide-based are having it. Please continue.
Okay, we'll get to the reproductive thing. But what I want to go is bring completely new stuff that we're preparing for a new film, which, by the way, our mutual friend Mike Adams is doing a matching grant so that our institute can finish their production and promote. That's at responsibletechnology.org. What I want to focus in on is digestive issues, and then we're going to link it to autism. As you know, with autism, most of the kids have some form of digestive ailment, and they also have behavioral disorders. We've already talked about in the previous segment many animals having behavioral disorders when being fed GMOs. Let's look at their digestive tracts and see if it resembles at all the kind of gnarly and messed up digestion that we're seeing in autistic kids. I talked to butchers and farmers that butcher their own animals, and whenever they've compared GM fed to non-GM fed, they say it's night and day. They say, for example, the intestines of the GM fed animals are so disrupted, they're like paper thin and they can tear apart. So we no longer, as a country, use our own animals' intestines for sausage casings. We import them from New Zealand, where they don't feed GMOs. I've also heard that the organs are discolored among the GM-fed animals and have a foul stench. Now, the stench is probably linked to the change in the gut flora. There's a complete change, according to many veterinarians, as well as doctors, in the gut flora, both of animals fed GMOs and in children.
Okay, I'm going to stop you again.
Autism.
I'm going to stop you again. We've done deep research that no one is covering that I've seen. I'm going to bring this up. I know you've probably seen it. But Aaron Dykes has exposed that Bill Gates is the big eugenicist for population reduction. He's bought into Monsanto. His other big funding is studying and trying to buy up control of gut disorder investigations, because it's a big new market because everybody's getting it. And then all the studies are showing it's attacking the organs. This is confirmed. But here he is trying to take control of it so that no company's out there to expose what's going on. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware that he was investing in that. I do know he's a major investor in Monsanto, that the person in charge of his agricultural section of his foundation is a former Monsanto guy. I heard him speak at the World Food Prize a couple of years ago when he said he was converted by a visit from the Rockefeller Foundation to become a GMO advocate. So, yeah, I'm aware of Gates' position on GMOs, and I was not aware about the gastrointestinal investigations. But I want to
Yeah, well,
talk
his dad,
about.
it turns out, worked for the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah, it's all a big. Yeah, please continue. So you're making a film with all the devastating evidence that of what this weapon system's doing.
You know, we've talked in the past in previous films and books about the laboratory studies. For example, the animals that are fed GM soy have changed uteruses and ovaries, damage to the young sperm cells, higher infant mortality, sterility by the third generation, hair growing in their mouths, fewer babies, smaller babies. We see the work done in laboratories. But what we're doing with this new film is correlating it with interviews with veterinarians and farmers, pet owners and pet veterinarians, and doctors and parents. Because what we're seeing is a correlation between the type of problems identified in the laboratory with the type of problems that are exploding in the doctor's offices in the United States. Now, autism, I'm just focusing on autism right now because it's an interesting link, and I happen to be writing a very extensive paper on it this week, so it's fresh in my mind, but it's all new information. Now, you mentioned earlier, Alex, about the insecticidal corn and cotton. That's Bt toxin produced in every cell of corn and cotton. They take a gene from soil bacteria, insert it into the DNA of the plant, so every little cell has a little spray bottle. Now, the excuse that the Environmental Protection Agency says is why they can put a pesticide that breaks open the stomach of insects and kills them, why they can put that in food, is that they say it has no impact on human cells or mammal cells. Well, a study came out this past week from the Journal of Applied Toxicology, where for the first time they took Bt toxin derived from genetically modified plants and exposed it to human cells. And lo and behold, what we all knew, but the EPA denied, is that it caused the process of starting to kill the cells, and it caused a break open of the membranes so that fluid leaked out and was detected in higher numbers. Now, this is exactly what we think happens with insects and why this Bt toxin kills insects. It destroys the integrity of their digestive tract. What I hear from
that was a German study 6-7 years ago. Yeah, that it's destroying their intestines, including the bees. So they're just this is an Armageddon. Please continue, but I want to ask you from your research, why do you think they're doing it? How do they think they'll get away with this? Go ahead.
Let's come back to that question, because that's a lot of opinions and a lot of ideas, but let's talk about the facts for just a moment. I'll get to that. When we look at the Bt toxin causing these pores or openings in the intestines, there's a whole new field among progressive, cutting-edge medical practitioners that are treating or looking at gut permeability. If undigested food gets through these holes into the blood, that might explain the rise in food allergies, autoimmune disease, inflammation, possibly autism. Because gut permeability is one of the factors that scientists are documenting accompany autism in large numbers. So I was giving a talk recently.
But wait, there's also big studies out, just to back you up again, that just came out, that they're finding the GMO DNA and RNA is actually going through the blood and into the cells. They'd always said that was impossible, and Monsanto's come out and said it's fine to have our DNA in your cells. So it's actually going through now. I think that's more than just gut permeability. It's that, you know, before we are what we eat, and all this stuff that's slowly developed on this planet, we're able to absorb, and it's part of the normal order. You start splicing and crossing and doing all of this, it shows that at a micro level, we're all interchanging at levels we never knew before.
Let's talk about just this gene transfer, because this is one of the scariest things that is currently documented. The only human feeding study ever published verified that part of the gene inserted into soybeans, making those soybeans Roundup ready, unkillable with Roundup, transferred into the DNA of bacteria living inside our intestines. And that bacteria was unkillable with Roundup. So they had Roundup-ready gut bacteria, suggesting that that gene was functioning. Now, pretend that you're eating genetically engineered Bt corn chips, and the same transfer occurs. What if the gene that produces this toxin that breaks open the stomach of insects and possibly human intestines, what if that gene were to transfer to our own gut bacteria and continue to function? It might turn our pesticide, our living intestine, excuse me, it may turn our flora into living pesticide factories. Now, one of the studies that came out last year gives support for this. In Canada, they tested the blood of 30 pregnant women and their unborn fetuses and found in 93% of the pregnant women, the Bt toxin was in their blood and in the blood of 80% of the cord blood of their unborn fetuses. So what this means is that somehow the Bt toxin is getting into the bloodstream, and this is not supposed to happen according to the EPA. According to the EPA, it's supposed to be destroyed during digestion. So the authors were wondering, how come the frequency is so high? We don't eat that much corn chips and fresh corn to justify that. So they expected that it was eating the meat and dairy from animals that have been fed Monsanto's corn, which was the source of the Bt toxin. But I think it's more likely that it was the transformation of the gut bacteria inside the intestines of North Americans, which is causing this high constant exposure. And when I talk about this to medical conferences where I speak all the time, doctors invariably tell me that the rise in gastrointestinal problems has been astronomical. Irritable bowel syndrome, for example, is up 40% since GMOs were introduced. Well, for those that don't know much about GMOs, but I'm sure your normal audience does, there are two main traits. One is that which produces the insecticide, which we've talked about, and the other is that which withstands high doses of herbicide, and most popular for that is Roundup-ready crops that withstand large doses of Roundup. Now, Roundup has been shown to disrupt reproductive function. It can kill human placental cells, it disrupts estrogen, it causes birth defects, it causes abnormal and lower sperm count.
Being an extremist, come on, weed killer isn't bad for you. Next you're going to tell me rat poison's not good for me either.
One thing that it does is that it kills off beneficial bacteria in the gut of cows, which normally keep botulism bacteria in check. So recent studies have shown that very tiny amounts of Roundup, less than would be residue on the food of these animals, can reduce the controlling bacteria and cause an explosion of botulism within the animal's gut. And I've seen pictures of it, and it's not pretty. So this is another way that Roundup might be causing disaster. But I wanted to talk about a new way, one that some of your listeners might be familiar with. There was a study, a series of analyses done on aborted fetal tissue of livestock where the farmer was beside himself. There was such high rate of abortions, spontaneous abortions. And on the aborted fetal tissue was a new organism only visible with an electron microscope. And they figured out where is this stuff coming from? So they did analysis of the feed. And when the feed was treated with Roundup, either it was Roundup-ready crops or products that had Roundup sprayed, there were high concentrations of this organism and high concentrations on diseased plants that are known to be getting disease because of Roundup.
What is it?
They took this organism and they exposed it to a pregnant chicken. It killed the fetus in 24 to 48 hours. Now, this organism has never been discovered before. It's completely new to science. It's the size of a virus. It operates, it looks like a fungus, and it appears to be everywhere, but in high concentrations around diseased plants and infertile animals and animals that have spontaneous abortions. So a letter was written by a senior researcher, by a professor emeritus, in fact, Professor Dr. Don Huber, who had decades of study and was an expert at Roundup effects. He was also on a military group that evaluates the threats of outbreak of disease, both natural and man-made. And in his letter to Secretary Vilsack of the USDA, he said, this is an emergency. He pointed out that there's widespread infertility among animals, that there might be a human link, of course, and that Vilsack should not approve Roundup-ready alfalfa because that would only increase the exposure of the population to Roundup at a time when we need to put money now into investigating whether this organism is causing the problem and linked to Roundup or GMOs. He sent that letter on January 17th, privately to Secretary Vilsack. It was leaked onto the internet, so that's why I can talk about it. He was finally called weeks later by someone from the USDA. He gave them the names of the researchers, and the researchers have not yet been contacted by the USDA, and that was over a
All right,
year
let me
ago.
stop you. Let me stop you. Oh my God, I'm going to have you back up next week because we've only got 30 minutes left, 35 minutes before our next guest joins us. This is so bombshell because I research this stuff every day now, and I didn't even know what you're just saying here, but I knew about how it's basically creating new bacteria in the stomach and displacing the others, where I guess you won't be able to live without the Roundup now in some sick way. It's like they're turning us into these biological androids that are dependent on them and ill from their system, and then they sell us expensive treatments. But I've seen these reports of GMOs crossing and creating new mutations, but now in new, not just species, but new whole organism families. This is exactly what many genetic engineers I've had on, I just got chills, have warned of. And here's the key. We're going to come back and talk about this. They're not just coming out with dozens of new crops. They're coming out with hundreds of new ones. Grasses, trees. They're just taking everything over. They're total psychos. Jeffrey M. Smith's our guest. This is the most important information we could be covering right now. Incredible. Now, I'm ranting here, Jeffrey Smith. I want to give the number out and take some calls for you. 800-259-9231. 800-259-9231. We have all of your books available in the online video bookstore at Infowars.com. Genetic Roulette, Seeds of Deception, your film, other films that you've been involved in, great films like The World According to Monsanto that you think's hardcore. It's very well done, but it's even worse than that. But I want you to continue. The toll-free number to join us is 800-259-9231 on this subject, folks, 800-259-9231. In fact, I should have said this because the calls will load now and we won't have any room for others. I've done this before just by myself and called for farmers to call and said, have you had good luck with GMO? Or have you had problems? And every farmer that calls who has livestock says, you feed it to them, they have health problems, they start dying. You start having more, calves that die. They're stillborn. More calves you got to pull. I'm not going to get into what that is, but I've worked for a large animal vet and done it. All of it. Some people that just grow soybeans or whatever say, no, it's all right. Neighbors don't like it, though. They think the runoff's killing their fish in their tank. And that's about what you get. And, the health problems with it in your drinking water. But going back to Mr. Smith here, the author, the researcher, other key points you want to cover here before you get into my main question. I think you answered it. The government just isn't even responding. How does the elite think they're going to get out of what they're doing to all of us when it's obviously affecting them as well?
It's an interesting question. When Obama took his position at the White House, an article came out indicating that he had insisted that his kitchen was organic. And it came out in the same article that so too did the Bush administration, that Laura Bush was emphatic that would only serve organic, and of course organic means non-GMO. Now, I talked to a former scientist from Monsanto, and he said that he knew of 3 colleagues that did safety studies on Monsanto's bovine growth hormone, found so much of the IGF-1 hormone elevated in the milk, and it's linked to cancer. These 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. I also report in Seeds of Deception how the head of the restaurant that's found inside the UK headquarters of Monsanto responded to a request and said, we try to remove as many GMOs as possible because of requests by our customers. And of course, their customers are Monsanto employees. And someone told me just this year that an insider had actually had lunch with Monsanto employees, I think it was in England, off-site, and they took several people off-site, and he joked, well, we have to be careful, we're getting GMOs. And the guy turned to him very seriously and said, oh, don't worry, we get our food brought in specially, it's organic. So,
by the way, Jeff, let me just back you up on that because I actually did a report on this 2 weeks ago. I didn't even know that, and I'd read your book. I must have forgotten it. But when I was told this by a listener, and I went and checked it, there was BBC, Associated Press, where all of the major Monsanto cafeterias, their engineers at the actual facilities where they make the stuff, not their chemical plants and stuff, all refuse and demand no GMO be allowed. Then I found articles where the royal family do that, headlines even in the LA Times and Asia Times where the Chinese communist elite have, quote, secret gardens and farms and are obsessed with only non-GMO GMO. I found articles where the German government does it. I found articles where all over the world and where all of the environmental eugenicists that are pushing this GMO on us, they're obsessed with it. And the Rockefellers have chefs, so does Prince Charles, and aircraft that follow them with the entire certified, in many cases on their own farms, food that is then gourmet produced. I mean, they are avoiding it like it's deadly poison. And then we found out the German government doesn't take vaccines and has special vaccines for themselves. I mean, you're not, again, I'm backing you up. You're not just saying this. Please continue.
Well, you know, one of the issues that you mentioned earlier is GMOs are not isolated. They cross-pollinate, they mix. Even the Roundup is now found in 60 to 100% of air, rain, and water samples in the Midwest. It's found in the urine of urban dwellers. It's found in cord blood, in human blood. It's found in surface water and in groundwater. So it's become omnipresent, like Monsanto's PCBs, their previous poison. And the GMOs are now, of course, impacting organic and other places by increasing the levels of contamination slowly. So this begs the question, how stupid can these people be if their intention was to create a problem with GMOs, because they'd be sawing off the branch that they're sitting on, because we all live in the same biosphere and there is no way to contain it. Now, one of the ways that we can fight back, Alex, is through required labeling. And there's a ballot initiative in California on the November ballot. They're actually gathering petition signatures right now. So if any of your audience lives in California, they can join the effort. Go to labelgmos.org and get a training on how to fill out petitions with your friends. So right now, we have an unprecedented opportunity to pass a law in California that doesn't have to go through legislators that have been bought off by Monsanto. And if it gets passed, the food companies realize that 53% of Americans say they would avoid GMOs if labeled. So these companies would rather remove GMOs than admit that they use them. They've already removed GMOs in Europe because of a consumer tipping point against GMOs happened there. They've already removed largely most of the bovine growth hormone from their dairy cows because the consumers became aware of the cancer risk. So if they have to label GMOs, they will probably remove it. And there's been an upswell now of concern about GMOs, and one of the obvious things is to enforce labeling, which is now enforced in over 50 countries, but not the US or Canada. So I encourage the people who are listening, who are in California, to get involved. And for everyone else, get on our website at responsibletechnology.org and join the Tipping Point Network. What's happening now, Alex, is we have consumers more and more on our side. The labeling issue is something that could topple it, but so too can even a small percentage of consumers avoiding GM ingredients. Here's my thinking. The same companies like Kraft and Nestle's and Hershey's and McDonald's removed GMOs in Europe because they were a marketing liability, continue to sell them in the United States where they are not yet a marketing liability. If we see that there's any drop in market share that they can attribute directly to anti-GMO sentiment rising in the US, there's no reason for them to continue to use GMOs. There's no consumer benefits. They either drink poisonous herbicide or produce poisonous bug killer. And so they will immediately rush away from GMOs in the United States like they did within a single week in Europe in late April 1999.